So at the end of the first year, I had another welcome addition to the team. I had had a reasonable amount of interaction with the European Space Agency, and they agreed that they would second, and indeed in this case they actually pay for him, to come and work in my team. So he is a trained medic. He's also gone through astronaut training, and so he has a great background for us. And I should have said that Jan Marco Muller is a geographer, so we also have scientific expertise there in our team. I can speak to, because I report directly to President Barroso, it does give me privileged access to some of the structures or institutions within the European Union. And I spoke to the Competitiveness Council. These are the science ministers of the member states. And I talked to them at the end of my first year about the value of having a chief scientific advisor. More of that later. We also had the first meeting of the President's Science and Technology Advisory Council, because I was aware that I wasn't bringing together enough expertise to be able to look at things in a more deliberative way. And I thought having an advisory council would be very useful, as indeed it has proved useful. This was quite a funny thing for me, because the magazine Science wrote if you like, an unofficial midterm review of how I was getting along, and it's just the title that's worth looking at, which is Europe's Science Superwoman Struggles to Get Off the Ground. And you can take that in so many ways. What the article said was fairly straightforward, and indeed the journalist had come and spent 2 days with me. He just he hung around with me for all of the 2 days, and I'm not claiming as much energy as Peter, but I know at the end of the first day, he gave up about 9 in the evening whilst we were still going off to receptions, and so he's saying, oh, I can't do this. So he did see what I did and did this review. It wasn't welcomed in the Commission. That was interesting to me as well. Okay, so it can be physically demanding, the job of CSA. This isn't really physically demanding, although it is at over 5,000 meters. So this was the inauguration of the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, which the European Southern Observatory have developed in Chile. So I had the opportunity to go as a Commission representative, and that gave me an insight, as I've had many times, to the fantastic European science. Now, you'll get the idea, I need to speed up a little bit, but the European agencies are important. At yesterday's meeting on science diplomacy, we heard from Hubert de Luyker from the European Food Safety Authority, and in fact, Hubert is now the chair of this group of scientific advisors from each of the agencies. And I'd spoken to the agencies and thought it might be useful if they had such a network. And I now interact with this network, and I think there's a lot more potential here, because the agencies are all kept separate, and I think we're missing something, because if they shared good practice, if they interacted, and if there was a better mechanism of interaction with the Commission, I think that would be very much better. Okay, so I finally got my own PA, and after about a year and a bit, who's really also an office manager, which is very effective, and it does help the team very well. I spoke to the College of Commissioners, which is somewhat unusual for an official, if you like, from inside the Commission to go and speak to the commissioners. But I was talking to them about how do you have an innovation-friendly society, because people always say that in Europe we are risk-averse. I'm not so sure if we're risk-averse. It's just that we identify certain risks as being quite threatening, and other risks which other people might worry about, we don't. So it is partly a cultural thing. But this was to reflect some of the work we were doing with the President's Science and Technology Advisory Council. Access to documents requests. So this is like a freedom of information request. I just note that these started coming in. So the more information or the more public impact I was having, these freedom of information requests come in. I'll come back to this in a minute. I need to know about progress, so I have done a lot of visits. That was the Helmholtz Institute there that I was at, looking at the water basins of the Mediterranean, because that is a scientific issue, but it's also, access to water is also a social and political issue. The Science and Technology Advisory Council did their first report, and it was really about science and society. We need to be smarter, and there's been a lot of mention of social science, and we have social scientists on the Science and Technology Advisory Council, and the social science is crucial in trying to understand how we might do things better to be able to make sure that society has the ability to demand or ask for or absorb things that we might make available through science, engineering, and technology. This was an interesting meeting. The Commission was having problems around proposed new legislation for endocrine disrupting chemicals. And there were a series of open letters, many of them addressed to me in the press, either in journals or on open fora or NGO fora, saying, asking me to comment on how the Commission had dealt with evidence gathering in this case. And it's not really my job to do that, so in fact the Commission responded. I passed that letter over to the Director General involved, which is DG Environment. But because it was ongoing, what I did was ask the scientists involved, so there were basically two different camps or two different views of science, both legitimately held, both evidence-based. And what I did was ask them if they wanted to come and have a meeting with me, and they could appoint who they wanted to come, but an equal number on both sides, and just to discuss the science so that we could have a common understanding of what we could agree on and what we could not agree on. It was an absolutely great meeting. I deliberately said no policy people in the room at all, because this wasn't about policy, it was about the science. And I wanted to talk about the science. And just a very brief aside, if you were a behavioral psychologist, you would have had a field day, because these people had written very rude letters about each other in the press. But of course, they didn't normally come together. So when they came in, my superb assistant had provided, lovely Belgian chocolates and things like that to try and soften them all up. And we invited them in, and I tried to get them to sit in a staggered way so they weren't just across the table. No, I'm only going to sit with my friends. So I said, well, that's okay then. And then there was one person in particular, so no names, but one scientist had his arms folded. Okay, so it was one of the men, but he had his arms folded. He was sitting so far back, I thought he was going to fall off his chair, and to the side. So it was like such a physical statement of, I really don't want to talk to you. But anyway, at the end, we had a joint statement. We did have a good discussion on what we needed to know, and that we passed back to the Commission services, and probably for the first time, I got letters to say thank you very much, because this has been enormously helpful. That particular activity has been badly used in the press to try and say that the role of Chief Scientific Advisor is not a good one. They have totally distorted what happened at that meeting, even although it's in the public domain and the minutes are published. Anyway, European Parliament has got an in-house research service now. This is interesting. It's over 200 people are employed in this in-house research service. How many of it was 5 in my team? So, okay. Parliament have got 200 people looking at providing information research evidence for some of the policy issues they're going to be looking at. I welcome this very much, but the European Council still doesn't have one. But if the member states had science advice, that might not matter, but we're working on that. Okay, so this was which day? Was this big day? Okay, 29th of November 2013. I think I did pretty well to get to then before my first public call for resignation. So this was from French scientist Gilles-Éric Seralini, who thinks you would get cancer if you ate GM food. I'm rather abbreviating that. And on the right, Madame Lepage, who is a Green MEP, French MEP. And this was where I first understood things can get quite nasty. And I was particularly disappointed that an elected representative, Madame Lepage, of a quality political party in France, wrote in public articles that I was a former employee of Monsanto. I have never been an employee of Monsanto, or received a grant from Monsanto, or done anything with Monsanto. And this, for me, was shocking that she would do this. And eventually she made an apology, but it was a qualified apology. And it was, oh, okay, I'm sorry I said that because you haven't worked for Monsanto, but you can't blame me for thinking you might have. So for me, that's an apology with your fingers crossed behind your back, and that's not classy. Okay, so because I thought people need to know, I published a detailed conflict of interest statement on my website. There is no obligation to do this in the Commission, and in fact, it was hard to get the Commission to agree, because the only people who publish statements like this are the commissioners. And for them, it was a little bit almost offensive that a much more lowly person, not a commissioner, was publishing a conflict of interest statement. So we had to work quite hard to get them to allow us to put this on the website. But I mean, I'm happy to do this, although even that has been abused, which I think is quite strange. So people are distorting the facts on that website. So access to document requests, yes, here's another one, this time Pesticide Action Network. And just because we're scientists, we started measuring the height of our response. And obviously we need to know how long it's going to take. I just note that there. We've got another seconded national expert from the UK House of Commons. And if Chris Tyler's here, I have to say thank you. Thank you, Chris, because Zamira Malik, Chris was Zamira's boss, but Zamira has come to us for a year, and she's terrific, so that's great. Anna Maria Costas left us, Zamira came, so we're still 5, and Zamira brings great experience with her. I'm trying to convince each member state to have a chief scientific advisor. This is a meeting in Bulgaria. And then also I chaired the first meeting, and we in fact set up, with the support of President Barroso, the first foresight network within the Commission. Now you heard David Mayer talk earlier about JRC's expertise and indeed activity in foresight, but it was very patchy across the Commission. Some people were doing it, some not. And we have got over 20 different Commission services to sign up to the network, with over 200 staff allocated, and they produce files or fiches, over 50 of them, on key areas of science, engineering and technology that might have big impacts in the future. We had a short secondee from the Belgian Academy of Sciences, linking again with the academies, which I think is very useful. That was just for a short period of time, and Sophie has now left us. Okay, so this is another nice part of the job. This is in French Guiana, Kourou, which is the European spaceport where we use rockets to put up our satellites and so on. In this case, this was part of the Copernicus Earth Observation System satellites launched on a Soyuz rocket, which don't have such a good reputation just over the last week or two. But anyway, this one going up, and that was great to be able to also understand how European activity, in this case in French Guiana, but how that has an impact in building capacity and also understanding of science from very young people, the schools in the area, from the spaceport, and also providing specialist and high value employment to local people. Another access to documents request. I'm just mentioning these because they are an awful lot of work. This one by Corporate Europe Observatory. Okay, so here's our measure this time. It's a bit big, that one. But, you know, they want to know also, you know, how many times do I interact with other chief scientific advisors? What do we say? And so on. I invited a number of NGOs to discuss how the use of evidence could be improved in policy making, and also what they felt about the role of a chief scientific advisor. And if they had views and opinions, you know, what would good look like, you know, from their point of view. So these are the ones that we invited, and I'll mention something about that in a minute. So it is good to have friends, and when I started in my position, then these were the only other chief scientific advisors in the European Union. So Paddy Cunningham then in Ireland, John Beddington in the UK, and Rudolf Hanka in the Czech Republic. But actually by the middle of this year, we have 14 different chief scientific advisors in different countries across the member states. Sometimes they're heads of academies, sometimes heads of advisory committees, sometimes they are a chief scientific advisor, sometimes they're a member of the civil service. But for the first time, we had a meeting in Copenhagen at the second ESOF meeting that I was at, and we had actually a really useful meeting, and we meet again in December in Amsterdam. So I'm very pleased about this, and it's building momentum. So it's one of those things, I hope it's a club that everybody will want to join, because I said that the European Council don't have science advice, but if they all had science advisors or someone performing that role, then they would be well briefed on issues before going to council, and I think that that would really support high quality discussion. Okay, so this came as a bit of a shock. We got a letter, or there was a letter published in the press where a number of NGOs, a number of them whom I had asked previously to come to a meeting to talk about science advice and what they like and what they don't like. So, in other words, I wish to have dialogue. This isn't dialogue, this is shouting at someone, which is really no good way to debate. But they said that the role of chief scientific advisor was fundamentally problematic as it concentrates too much influence in one person. Now, can you remember that slide way back where the Commission made a statement saying, it doesn't matter what she says because we don't pay any attention to her anyway? That's in the public domain. So I don't know what they mean by this, okay? I'm unaccountable, intransparent, and controversial. I'm not controversial. Unaccountable, I definitely am, both to, of course, my employer, but also to the wider community, and that's why I say what I do on my website. And I have called repeatedly for transparency about evidence gathering. And they would rather instead have a variety of independent, multidisciplinary sources with a focus on public interest to provide the evidence. That sounds like them. I don't know. This was a shock, but I was really pleased that letter after letter came in supporting the role from a very broad range of stakeholders. So it came in from think tanks, from businesses, from European academies, the European Federation of Science Journalists. So this was a fantastic thing, because sometimes people do support you, but they don't say. So, and it wasn't support for me personally, it was support for the role of chief scientific advisor, and this was a fantastic thing. And these people are very vocal, and they have done a number of letters really saying why they feel the role of chief scientific advisor is a good thing. And I would be the first to say that we really must do things better, but getting rid of the role for me would be the most amazing backward step and terribly damaging to the Commission if this was done. But anyway, very vocal. That obviously upset the NGOs, so they got more of their friends. So initially it was just 7, now they're up to 22. It's nice they've got friends. So, so they're saying actually the intention was to stimulate a debate. Well, actually you have to speak to someone to have a debate. And I'm really, because for everything in my entire professional career, as well as more recently with government. Scientists do this. You want to talk to someone. You need to talk to people to refine your ideas and also to understand sometimes when you've got things wrong. And although I have repeatedly asked these people to come and debate issues with me, they won't do that. They came once, but not all of them. And secondarily, they've never invited me to talk to them. And that's because they don't want a debate, in my view. That's my conclusion. Anyway, this is an ongoing issue, and they're trying to influence the new president-elect of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, to abolish the role. So, I've shared some of my experiences with you. Here are my lessons learned. Not all of them, and we've not done this in a very sophisticated way, but EU policies are much more technical than member state policies by and large, because it's about harmonisation of things across the EU. And so this drags science into the political battlefield, and we need to be aware of this. Convincing the Commission of scientific evidence is actually very easy. It's convincing 751 members of the European Parliament from 190 different political parties, all with different philosophies, as well as 28 national governments. I think you're getting the picture. That's hard. And all of these people want to say back at home that their position was the one that was forced through on the vote. And so it is actually it's more complicated than I naively thought. A science advisor, I think, in the Commission really needs some counterpoints in Parliament and in Council and in the member state governments to try and ease the understanding about what the evidence is, so that politicians do what they're good at, which is talking about the politics, and they don't start arguing about the evidence, which is what they're not good at. So I think that that's important. And also, there is a diversity of cultural approach to science advice, and I would be very supportive of this idea. Some member states say that the CSA model does not suit them. And actually, I have to say, because for me, as a British person, it is quite funny. We have a well-developed model in the UK, and it's always referred to as the Anglo-Saxon model of chief scientific advisor. And when people say this from other member states, the Anglo-Saxon model, I can see in my mind, I have this cartoon where they're going Anglo-Saxon model. It's like an insult, and for me it's quite funny. It obviously works well for Anglo-Saxon countries, but not for others. And I think we do need to be imaginative and inclusive about how people want to deliver advice. Just because it works in Anglo-Saxon countries does not mean it's going to work elsewhere, and it'd be damaging to try and impose that. It'd be a dreadful thing to do. Okay, so many people like my role, partly because I do speak out. I behave differently than I think most, if not all, other Commission officials. And President Barroso, once we agreed to the idea of calling me an independent chief scientific advisor, first of all, he said, that's not possible. And I said, okay, can't do the job. So we talked about the value of being independent. And I said to him, why it would be a good idea. I won't go into that. And he said, okay, I can accept that, but promise me one thing. I said, okay. And he said, never embarrass me. Well, I had the foresight at the time to say, I can't actually promise you never to embarrass you, but I can promise you to never knowingly embarrass you. Will you accept that? Okay. So, because I'm sure I've certainly annoyed him, if not embarrassed him. So there's a lot of appetite for scientific evidence in Brussels. And it's worth saying, the people at the Commission, you hear about the bad stuff in the press, the people at the Commission are fantastic, highly qualified, very motivated, imaginative. These people are superb, and we need to use them and get the best out of them. And I think a chief scientific advisor has got some input into not delivering that, but helping that happen. There was a lot of support from the role from the scientific community as well as business community. They say that the CSA is a voice of reason, but they say that when I'm talking about certain things, but actually I've gone crazy when I'm talking about climate change apparently. But anyway, we would expect that. The NGOs oppose the role, or at least those NGOs that I mentioned. Although it's not in my job description, there is a need for this idea of scientific ombudsman, where there's a big scientific issue and people are arguing about it, and also where people write to the Commission about complaints about things that how science evidence has been handled and so on. And they feel happy about me being involved because, and it was mentioned this morning, it's about trust. And I think by and large, I am lucky to have the trust of many people, which allows me to do the job that I do. I have been the constant target of lobbying, actually under the wrong assumption that it would either influence my advice, and also under the assumption I have much more influence than in reality I have. But it is then important to be transparent for me about who I meet and what we say and what is done. I think that's really important. Last thing, I was very impressed by the rigor of Commission procedures. They're really good. And I've also identified areas that I think there could be room for improvement. And I think how science or evidence is used in the impact assessment and when it is used really needs attention. Sometimes lack of harmonized guidelines for gathering evidence. You know, how do you get it, who from, who knows about it, how that's, sometimes it's not made transparent. I think there's no excuse for that. It should be transparent. And also selective use of evidence, because I've seen that as well. There's a wealth of competence and expertise already available. David mentioned the JRC this morning. There's the European Union agencies, which I referred to earlier, in the National Science Academies of Europe. So there's a huge amount, and it's far from being fully valued and harnessed into the situation. And I think the European Commission has had a real difficulty in dealing with someone who doesn't speak the official line. But I would say that there's a huge advantage to having someone who doesn't speak the official line, because often, and this has happened, where a Director General has said to me, there's a thing happening here, but I can't say anything about it. What do you think about it? And I might look at it and say, well, I can say something about that. And then once I've said it, they can then come in and say, oh, okay, she's raised it. We would like to submit to this information or this evidence. So it helps sometimes ease a bureaucratic environment if you use that, not extensively, but if you use it carefully. And I would say, lastly, that in-house politics did hamper the efficiency of the role. I think many people in the Commission simply didn't want a chief scientific advisor, so it was a little bit difficult. And I did have the necessary independence, but I was often excluded from essential information. And I think if that happens, it really does prejudice your chance of having impact. Oh, I didn't know there was more. There's a lot of lessons learned. I didn't see a lot of President Barroso, but I was listened to because I reported directly to him, which was useful. Convening power is very important, and I did have convening power. So if you phone up and say, European Commission Chief Scientific Advisor would like you to come to a meeting, most people come to the meeting, actually. Running the Chief Scientific Advisor function really isn't possible if you don't have adequate resources, because it's then actually hard to convene meetings. If you don't have the resource to physically convene the meeting, it's a bit difficult. I wouldn't have achieved anything without my team. I have been unbelievably lucky. And I'm not just saying this because Jan Marco is here. I have a great team, and they are utterly dedicated, imaginative, very hardworking, and they've done the work of 3 times that number of people. So nothing would have been possible without them. It's been frustrating, but I should say, and I might have said it at the beginning, I love my job. It's absolutely great. And European science and talking about it and making science have a difference to the citizens of Europe and actually global citizens is a tremendous thing to be able to contribute to, and I think that we do. So day 1000. What do I hope? Well, I hope that the President-elect, Jean-Claude Juncker, announces that he wants to strengthen the role of the Chief Scientific Advisor. I guess we have to wait and see. That will be interesting. Thank you very much for your attention.